Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Friday, another Masterclass Friday, that is. Thanks for joining me live. For those of you who are joining me live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, great. Glad you can hang out and watch there if you want. For those of you who are watching me on Adobe Live and Behance, that's even better because you'll be in the main chat. So how this works is I can see, for example, Tim Dalton over there from Denver on YouTube, but that chat window is one that I kind of monitor like sporadically. The main chat window with Jim and Levon Hall and Sam Peterson and JR Flores and Victoria, that's the main chat I'll be looking at. So if you want to get into that chat, head over to b.net/Adobe Live. That's the main chat that I'll be monitoring today. If I see your question, like for example, good morning from Vancouver, Canada. If I see your question, I'll try and get to it. But if I can't, just go ask it over in the other chat. All right, so with that said, and also if you're watching the replay, thanks for watching the replay. Replay numbers are important to me. I really love when people, maybe they can't watch it live, but they come back and watch it later. So with that said, today is a kind of a recovery of Photoshop and maybe some tips and tricks and maybe some things that you either knew but forgot about or just never knew. So that's what we're going to be focused on today. So though, for those of you who are super new, like this is your first time, Masterclass Friday is where the Adobe evangelists, myself, Paul Tranny, Jason Levine, Howard Pinsky, Kyle Webster, we all, and Katrina, we all get together and share our various disciplines on Fridays. So we got two left in this year, this one and next week, and that's it. We're done for the year. We'll come back in January. But today is going to be 10 things you didn't know were in Photoshop. Next week is an Ask Me Anything. So I haven't done one of those in a while, so just bring all your year-long questions that you've been wanting to ask and maybe never get answered, or you want to see someone show you how to do something. I'll do my best to accommodate all the questions I can. So next week, that's next week. All right. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive right into today's topic. Let's get rid of that banner, switch over to my desktop. And I'm going to just, in no particular order, 10 things you didn't know were in Photoshop, or maybe you knew but forgot about, or you forgot and don't use anymore, or whatever. Whatever the case is. And you don't have to tell me, I knew that one. Oh, I didn't know. You don't have to tell me each one you knew. I get it. Some of you will know some of these, but I'm going to guess for the bulk of you, there will be things that the bulk of you didn't know. All right, so let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to be working with a lot of different images. Some of these are my own, some of these are stock. I think most of these are stock actually. So just random images that illustrate a point that I'm going to show. So the first thing, number one of the 10, is capture. Capture is a part of Photoshop. So what's capture? When you have an image and you go to your libraries panel, so you have to have a library, at least one, and you go down to the plus sign here down at the bottom right, that plus sign under your library panel, and you just click it, you'll see the CA icon. That's the CA is for Adobe Capture. And by the way, another tidbit you may not have known is Adobe Capture is also a mobile app. So you can go download that on your phone, and you can use Capture throughout the day when you're taking pictures of things. You can use it to grab content from the scenes and things around you. What Capture is in Photoshop is for after the fact. In other words, I'm already here. I'm not out on my phone. I have an image. I want to get things from that image. So that's why they renamed it Extract from Image, because in Photoshop, you're really extracting the content. Out on your phone, you're capturing the content. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at extract. it's capture, but extract from image. Now you have different categories. You have patterns, shapes, color themes, gradients, and type. For example, if I were to move this triangle around or move the image around in the triangle, that will allow me to create different patterns. So I can scale the pattern or scale the image to make the pattern different. I can rotate it. And basically, if I capture this or save this to my CC library, it will generate a usable pattern from that point on. A pattern that's going to be unique, that you never are going to see anyone else have, because you're making a pattern from your image using your settings, and it's very unlikely someone will have the exact same pattern. And by the way, it doesn't have to be the triangle. You have different methods of generating your pattern. Up here, you have 5 different ways to do it. Probably the 4th one being the most boring. That's just squares or rectangles, but these are pretty cool. And again, you move the image around in it to generate different types of patterns, again, that will be unique to you. So it's kind of one of those cool things, especially like, for example, on this lantern. There are little bitty lanterns throughout the pattern, and no one would know they're there unless they looked up close. So you can kind of make something unique to back up your photo or put behind a photo where someone says, hey, I have a boring background. Can I jazz up my background? Yes, you can with patterns. So for example, if I were to settle on that being my pattern, then I can go ahead, and by the way, I didn't look under here. So you can either make it colors or grayscale, so that's cool. I'm going to leave it color, and you can save that to your CC library, and it just popped it into my library, and that pattern's there forever for you to use forever from now on. So patterns, that's one. Shapes. Shapes will basically convert the image itself into a vector shape. So you can tell it how much or how little of the background you want, or the detail you want, I should say. And this will save it as a vector that you can take in Illustrator, and you can actually pick apart the lines and move the lines around and use vector shapes. So it's pretty cool to, and you can save, you can smooth it on shave, you can save, you can invert it, do all kinds of cool things. Now, this is not really the most interesting shape to make a shape from, but it's there. Now, and also you'll be able to, once you get it into a Photoshop or into another program, you can erase like the horizon line if you don't need that. You can get rid of things you don't need after you create it. Okay, next, color themes. This is probably the one I use the most. Like patterns are cool. I do use that. Shapes, I probably don't use that often, but color themes I use a lot, because if you're doing any kind of design where you need the photograph, obviously, because we're photographers, but you want to put some text on it. You want to put, maybe draw some shapes on it. You want to put other elements on it. Well, the trouble we usually run into is picking the colors of those things we're adding. Like, what color should the text be? What color should the objects be? Nothing looks better on a photo than having objects or text be the colors that are in the photo. So what this helps you do is grab those colors to use for everything else you're going to put with that photo going forward. And by the way, it automatically detects the different color variations in here. But if you want a specific color that it didn't detect, for example, maybe I want the blue that's in that sailboat there, that little hat or boat, I can move this around. So I can move the color picker around to grab the exact colors that I want. If I want a lighter blue, I can move that one around. I want a deeper orange from that sunset or sunrise, I can move that around. And basically I'm creating this 5-color theme. Once I save that to my CC library, that will be a color theme I can use from now on for forever, forever, forever. You can also choose the mode that it's going to be in. So maybe you're trying to make something a little bit more muted. So you get muted colors, you can get bright colors, you can get colorful colors, you can get deep colors. I like deep. You can get dark colors. That's kind of cool too. I can see that, especially if you have a very light image and you want kind of contrast with text and things to be darker, but again, using some of those same colors. And you can just say none, which means just use those colors. Don't add any, don't juice to it. Don't do anything to it. Just use those. All right, so I usually leave it on either colorful or bright, because that's the way I roll. I usually like those kinds of colors. So save that to my CC library, and boom, there it is for you to use those colors from now on. All right, and gradients. Now this is kind of interesting, to create a gradient from your image. And you can do this pretty easily in Photoshop already, but for people that are like, haven't figured out how to add stops and use stops in the gradient tool in Photoshop, this is a little easier, because you can literally just drag it around and get kind of the colors you want for that gradient. I want some more of that color, and maybe that color, or this color, and maybe something like, no, I need a little bit more contrast, maybe something like that. Okay, so now that I get my gradient there, again, I can Go ahead and save it. And of course, if you need more than 3 stops, you can add more stops. So you can make this gradient as colorful as you need it to be for what you're trying to do. So there's a gradient. I can save that. That becomes a gradient I can use. That's probably a little bit much, but it's a gradient I can use going forward. All right, next up, type. Now this image doesn't have any type in it. And if it did, you would place this. This is fairly new to Capture. You would place this over the text, and it will try and identify the font of that text in your image. So if time permits, I'll show you an example of that, but that's what type is. It's not to capture the actual text, because that actually be kind of cool, but it's actually designed to find a similar font, because yeah, it's an image you want, but yeah, okay, anyway. It can find the actual font or closest to it, because sometimes it's a handwritten font or some kind of font that's not an actual type, but it'll find the next closest thing that it thinks looks like it, and you can use that. Now there's a feature, again, if we have time, called Match Font that's built into Photoshop, and that's on my bonus list. If we run out of features and have more time, I'll show that. All right, so anyway, type is been added to extract or capture as well. So number 1, capture. Using capture inside of Photoshop. Most people don't know it's there because they never think to click that plus sign and go to extract from image, because it's kind of like, it's not obvious what it does. All right, next up. I'm going to close this one. And I'm going to go back. I would hope it would close in order, but it doesn't. All right, next up, there are 3 filters. So I'm going to do them in order. And they're probably the least known, but useful in many cases, filters in Photoshop. Now, the one caveat I'm going to say is that for all 3 of these, you definitely want to put them on their own layer. So in other words, don't do it on the background, because if you do it on the background, you're going to lose the flexibility to move it around or do something with it after you generate it. So I'm going to, just before I forget, create an empty layer right off the bat. And this first filter that we're going to use under the filter menu, they're all 3 under render. First one is picture frame. Now, the problem with picture frame is that even if you discovered it, you might have gone into it, maybe you got it by accident, maybe you saw me do it once before, because I did do it once before, and you looked at the frames and they look gross. They're designed by, the first ones in the list are designed by engineers, and they're like, you would never use them. I'm sorry, you wouldn't. But there is a good one in there. I'm going to show you how to use it. Picture frame. So let me pull the window over. Now I'm already on the one I would like to use, it's art frame, but you'll see things like that. And maybe you need a flower frame and for your image, and boom, you're all set. You can go ahead and customize that one all you want. And there's vines, and these is what I mean. Like, these just look kind of what we used to refer to as clip art. There's none of these that would make me say, ooh, I want to use this. So like, if you went through the first few of these and you said, nah, these just aren't professional looking, these just won't do anything for me, you were right. You were absolutely right that the first ones just don't look very, yeah. Anyway, so let's drop all the way down. Let's get down to in the 40s, which the best ones are at the bottom. I'm going to choose art frame. Now, art frame looks like a standard frame. And don't worry about the margin, or you can worry about the margin, but don't worry about the size or any of that, because no matter what you do here, the problem with this whole frame, this whole filter, is you're not seeing a preview of what it looks like on your image. So whatever you do here, you're literally guessing. Like, you're just trying to figure out, well, is this enough? Is this too much? And unfortunately, that's why we're going to do it on an empty layer, because then we can manipulate it to fit our photo. So don't worry too much about adjusting the parameters, because you're guessing, because you can't see what it looks like on your image. Let's go ahead and click OK. And again, put it on the image, and it's wrong. That's okay. Because now that it's on its own layer, I can turn it off, turn it on, and adjust it. So I can go to Free Transform. And this is one of those rare times we hold down the Shift key, because we want to do the opposite of proportional. We want to stretch it into the place where we need it to be. Now, the thing I don't like about this, even this frame, even though it's usable, is that it's super light on one side. So I could either use a mask and darken it on one side. I can duplicate it, flip it over and mask it out so it's darker on that side, which is what I usually do. So just keep in mind that that super light right-hand side, you will have to do something about that if you don't want that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it in this setting because, again, it is what it is. But at least you got the start there. Now, just putting a standard frame around your image, it's okay. You got to really take it up a notch by adding a matte. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another new layer, and we're going to sandwich that new layer. Oh, hold on, let's lock that in. We're going to sandwich that new layer in between. So let's call this one the frame. All right, next up, we're going to go ahead and make another new layer, and we're going to call this one the matte. All right, so now that we got our matte layer, what we're going to do on the matte layer is we're going to switch our default color. Actually, we can just go ahead and fill that layer with white. So let's go to default color, fill with white. Great. Now, I'm going to lower the opacity just so I can see where the person's head is. I don't want to cut off the person's head. So just enough to be able to see where the person's head is, because now I'm going to use a rectangle tool, and I'm just going to go ahead and just come in about maybe that much and just draw a rectangle. Because again, I'm just trying not to, I don't care about cutting off the bottom of his arm, but I just don't want to cut off his head. So something like that. All right, so now that I know I got the position right, I'm going to put the opacity back up, and we're just going to go ahead and delete that center part of the mask. Okay, so now we got our matte there, but again, what's going to make that matte look more real is adding one simple effect to it. We're going to go to the effects menu, and we're going to go to inner shadow. And when we go to inner shadow, let's see, it's hard to even see it on this photo, but anyway, because the photo is already so dark, let's go ahead and bring out, I want to do that. I want to go ahead and make it size. All right, there we go. Click OK. And that'll create like that subtle depth look to it, to where we have a shadow. So basically, and here, let me see if I got it. I have a background with a lighter example to it. Let me see if I've got that one here. I can show you the finished one of one that I've already done, if I have it real quick. If I don't worry, I won't worry about it. Dun, 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 dun. It was out on my desktop with a million other things. If not, I'll just move on. I don't see it right off the top of my head. Oh, there it is. That's it. Yep, there it is. All right, so that's the way it looks finished. So see that, and by the way, I put a stroke around that matte as well, so that it looks like it's inside the frame. So a couple things to do: inner shadow, and put a stroke around the border or the thing you cut out. And that way you can make the frame itself look real. And you can see also on this one where I darkened the right-hand side as well, so it's not all light. All right, next up, what would bevel do for the inner matte? Nothing in this case. It might make the corners a little bit more rounded. That's about it. Okay, next up, let's move on. And we're going to go to this one. And my next one is, again, there are 3 filters in that category. So photo frame was 1, picture frame was 1. Next one is actually a lot more useful. I'm going to make another new layer. Filter, render, tree. This one actually shocks me that it's this good, because these trees actually look realistic. So unlike the frame where the first 30 are just okay, not great, these trees are actually all pretty good. So you have all the different kinds of trees you might want. Pine trees, aspen trees, palm tree, whatever. So yeah, let's stick a palm tree here. Great, we got a palm tree. And you can control the leaves amount, so you can make it more leaves, less leaves, your choice. You have the light direction, which is important because if you're compositing this on a scene, you want the light to come from the same direction as the light that's in the scene. So it's coming, I think the light's coming from the left here, so I'm going to keep the light on the left-hand side. Depending on the tree, you have other things you can control, like, for example, the branch thickness, the leaf size, things like that. But this particular tree doesn't have those options. But just keep in mind, different trees will have different options. Once you click OK, that will put that tree in place. Just smack it right down in the middle. And again, this is why we do it on its own layer, so that we can move it around. And the only thing you would want to do here, I'll put it down at the bottom. The only thing you would want to do here is if you were going to put it in the snow, you want to kind of put the snow around it to make it look more realistic. Now keep in mind too that because it's on its own layer, we can free transform it. We can make it bigger or smaller. So if you wanted that super big tree to be there in your scene, you can put that super big tree in your scene. And again, you might want to go back and adjust the lighting a little bit, maybe tone it down a little bit because it's a little brighter than the rest of this. But yeah, trees that actually look real on their own layer that you can do whatever you want to do. So a palm tree in the middle of a snowfield. Who would have thunk it? Next up, this one is one that I already created one path. I'm going to show you. I created one path along the left-hand side of the staircase. Now I'll create the one on the right-hand side of the staircase so you can kind of see how this works. All right, so I'm going to grab the pen tool. So let's hit the letter P. That'll grab the pen tool, and I'm just going to put a path right here on the right-hand side. Click. Oh, shoot, I don't want to do that. Hold on. Oh, never mind. I need a new work path. There we go. Click. There we go. Click. And click. All right, so now I've got the two paths. I don't know if I can merge those together or not. Never tried that. Let's see. Can you merge paths here? It's been so long since I worked with this panel. All right, I'd have to do them separately because I don't see a way to merge them. But anyway, had I drawn it all in one thing, it would just be easier. But it doesn't matter whichever one I choose, the left one or the right one. Now when I go to the filter menu, again, make sure I'm on a new layer, paths, left or right path, filter. I want to go into render, flame. So flame's the third one. So when I go to flame, that brings up this window. You literally are putting a flame along the path. You can control how small or how much of an inferno you want. And you can control things like the width of the flames. You can control the angle of the flames. So maybe there's wind blowing the flames out. And you can control the interval. So they don't have to all be so close together. All right, so maybe something like that. We click OK, and that puts the flames down our staircase. There are times where you could use this. I would say it's harder when the background is light. It's easier when the background's darker. So just keep in mind, and if I want to do the same thing on the other side, filter, and just run it again, and that will just run the exact same one again. All right, so by the way, that's another just a hidden trick a lot of people don't know, is that rather than go down to render and choose flame again and choose the settings again, the last filter you ran will always be at the top of the filter menu. So if you just want to run that exact same filter again, just go up to filter and choose flame again. All right, would be cool if that was Christmas lights on greens instead of flames. Yeah, well, it's flame filter. All right, so there you go. Flames, 3 filters you probably didn't know about, one of which is probably very useful. The other 2 are, well, 2 are actually useful. Picture frame, using the right frame. Trees, very useful for adding more trees to a scene. Flame, depends on what you need. All right, next up, let's, this is one where I don't need an image. I'm actually going to do this from the menu. I'm going to go to my file menu and choose, like there's a ton of things that a lot of people don't realize are under automate. We're going to use one of them, but I just want to point out another one that takes me back because it's, let's see, is it here? Yeah, this one. This was back in the day when you used to use a scanner. Remember those flatbed scanners? You put your images down on the glass and close the cover and hit scan, and it would give you, we don't use those anymore. But this is kind of cool that this was here for those users back in the day. And if you scan 6 photos, for example, 3 on each side, and some of them were kind of crooked, this, you would bring up the flat scan of all 6 photos, and crop and straighten would identify each photo, straighten it out, and give you a separate file for it. So that's just trivia. That's not the one we came in here for, but that's kind of interesting to know that that was there. All right, what we came in here for, number 4, 5. Number 5 here is contact sheet. Contact sheet, I don't need it as much as I used to because I use Lightroom now, but it's still useful, especially for people that don't use Lightroom and they just use Photoshop. So what it allows you to do is, first of all, pick your source. You can choose a folder of images, and I've done this. I've already picked one of my Australia photos. You click choose. This is where you would go find your photo. So I chose my Australia photos. Great. That's the photo I'm going to use. Next, you now determine all the parameters of your contact sheet. What size is it? For example, maybe you're going to print it out and put it in I don't know, some kind of binder, 8.5 by 11 if you're in the US. How do you want the images to place? Across and then down, or down and then across? So you can do whichever one you want first, down first or across first. How many columns you want. And then you can also choose what's going to be a caption and what font it's going to be in. So I don't like Minion as much as I like Myriad Pro. Myriad Pro, there it is. And rotate for best fit. You can choose or not, or keep them straight up and down the way they were shot. And then once you say okay, it will generate that new document, that 8.5 by 11. And it will go through each image in that folder, which is what, and they're raw files, by the way, so it's going to take a second. And what it will do is, literally a second. And what it will do is, it will lay them all out for you on a contact sheet. So if you want to visually show someone their work or what's in a folder or their files or whatever, that's what we use contact sheet for. Again, Lightroom users have it easy because it's already putting everything in a folder or in a collection that's in a grid already. But Photoshop users didn't really have a way to do this without using a contact sheet. So now you do. All right, next up. So that was number 5. Number 6 is kind of a fun one. Let's go to this one. All right, I remember showing this in one of the streams before, and I ran out of time before I could finish it. So what we're going to do is we're going to select subject. We're going to duplicate that subject onto her own layer. So now she's on a layer all by herself. If I go to Layers panel, great. And next I'm going to take the background, and I'm going to try something. Let me turn off this for a minute. I'm going to turn off the one I made a copy of. I'm now going to go to the background and select subject again. And I'm going to remove her from the background. Now, it's not going to be perfect because her hair is probably not selected perfect. Let's see. Shift delete. Hold on. Actually, deselect, cancel. Let's go to the object selection tool. There we go. All right, so now shift delete. Content aware. Wait. Let's let that finish first. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I didn't think that would do a great job. Okay, let's do it the old-fashioned way. Let's just go ahead and grab our patch tool, and we're just going to go ahead and patch her out of the scene. Oh God, what is going on here? Hold on. Tell you what, I just want to fill this in. I just want to get rid of her. I just want the background to be the same color. So let's go to eyedropper, get that color that she's in, and there we go. And we can, again, it's not going to really matter for most of this. We're just going to patch out some of the stuff that looks weird. I'm doing this the hardest possible way I could. Could have done this a much easier way, but I'm already invested in the hard way, so let's do the hard way. All right, anyway, I got her out of the background, which is the main goal. Doesn't have to be perfect, she just needs to be not behind herself. So now she's back. Oh God, I messed that up. Okay, hang on. I didn't mean to mess up that much of the shadow. Quickly. Put the shadow back. So I'm using the history brush, which by the way, another one you might not have known about. The history brush is like undo on a brush. So history brush let me paint back in that part I got rid of by mistake. And I probably got her leg back in there too, right? Yep, don't matter because I'm not going to use that side. Okay, next up, I've got the person selected that I duplicated. Again, the most convoluted way to get this, but I got this selected. Now the point of this is to use number 6, which is Puppet Warp. So we're going to go into our edit menu, come down to Puppet Warp, and that will put a mesh on the layer that you have selected. So in this case, her. Now you can go in and put in points where you want to be able to bend that subject. So any parts that I want to be able to bend, I can click. So if I want her waist to bend, if I want her shoulder to bend, if I want this arm to bend, and again, all the joints where I'm going to want this to be able to move, I can put these in. All right, so now the whole point for this was that I can now bend that leg. And had I not removed the one from the background, you would see if I move this leg over, you'd see the other leg behind it. So that's why I didn't care so much about the right-hand side, because I'm not touching that side. But if you needed to bend this leg too, you'd need to get rid of the other leg in the background. All right, so now I could also go in, put one there, and put one here, and maybe bend that foot down a bit. So just Puppet Warp for when you need to bend a subject. And it could be a person. It could also be a object. So something that you need to warp into a scene and get it just right, you can. Now keep in mind, it's very easy to stretch things. So, let me add that one. Keep things in proportion as to the way they originally were, so it doesn't look so obvious that you did it. All right, that looks pretty good. So if I were to say okay, that would be my new leg bent just a little bit more on that jump. And that is Puppet Warp. Next up, let's go in and this is kind of one that a lot of people, here, let me see if I got a photo to put this on. A lot of people either forgot about or didn't realize we're ever there because it's not so obvious. Let's go here. All right. So for example, I'm going to just drop in 2 more layers onto this. Let's go in and drop in. And again, these don't necessarily relate to the scene. These are just examples. So I'll drop this one in, scale it down, and scale it down some more. And I'll drop one more in. Again, they don't necessarily relate to the scene. They're just for the purpose of doing the effect. Let's do, and yet I'm still looking for one that would look good. All right, so let's go ahead. Oh, drop that one in. Let's do one more. Okay, great. Actually, these could be travel related. All right. Let's kind of get them lined up. Great. Cancel, and there we go. All right, so now I've got these 2 in here, and of course I got the original background. What I want to do is switch my workspace over to a mode that would let me edit this like a video. So video editing is a part of Photoshop and has been for years. If I go to my workspaces here, you don't have to use a workspace, but there's one already built in for you. It's called Motion. So when I click Motion, that brings up the timeline. Now the timeline is just there by default. It's always there, but it's not, you don't, unless you create one, it's never doing anything over time. So when I create a timeline, it will show me the timeline for the various elements. Now in this case, the background is not an element. Since it's not a layer, it's not part of this, but the layers become tracks inside your video. And you can also even add an audio track. You can go get an MP3 and bring it in as well and have that part of the video. Why would you do this? Because there are things that are, for some users, that are easier to do in Photoshop because they understand Photoshop than moving to a full-fledged video editing app. I'm always going to prefer a full-fledged video editing app over doing it this way, but this eases Photoshop users into video editing. All right, next up, let's go in, and you notice that each layer, you can twirl it down. So I can twirl down the layers, and I get opacity, I get transform, opacity, and style. And twirl this one down, same thing, opacity, transform, and style. Now, I'm at the beginning of time, and again, if I move the playhead, nothing happens because I haven't done anything over time. I can say, for example, add a keyframe, because keyframes over time tell it to do something, like keyframe for transform, keyframe for opacity, keyframe for style. So I'm going to say for transform, add a keyframe, and it puts this little diamond right there. And let me get out of your way, by the way. I can see I'm in your way. It puts this little diamond, oops, hold on, that little diamond there on the track underneath the layer. So this one doesn't have one yet because I didn't click the stopwatch. So click the stopwatch, that gives me the diamond under that one as well. All right, so next up, I'm going to then move the playhead by how many ever seconds I want. So let's say 2 seconds. That's probably too long. Let's say 1 second. And then, actually, no, I take that back. Let's go back first. Now that I've got these in place, I'm going to move these objects. So I'm going to move this object off the scene, and then I'm going to go to this one and move it off the scene. Okay, so now at 0, they're not there. That's what I really want. But at 1 second, I want them to appear. So I'm going to go back to this first one. I have to turn off my auto select layer and move it over. And I can even move the playhead a little bit over so the other one comes in a little bit behind it. And then move that one over. Great. So now, if I go back in time and hit play, hit the space bar, they move into time. Now it's not rendered, so it's not moving in real time. But you've basically done a video edit just like that by changing what happens over time. So it could be things like, for example, let's say you add some text. Let's go back to the beginning. Add a text layer. And let's call it fisherman. And let's go ahead and make it bigger. And I'm not going to worry about the typography or the font or anything. I'm just going to go ahead and drop it in. Great. And I can say that for this fisherman text, let's twirl down the track, I get text warp, by the way, as something that could be affected. So you could have the text wave and do things with text warp over time. But anyway, I'm just going to do something simple. I'm just going to do opacity. And I'm going to say that the opacity for that is going to start out at 0. And then by the time it reaches a little bit past those 2 images coming in, I'm going to set the opacity back to 100. All right. So this is what my video looks like. Now, the opacity happened from the very beginning of 0 all the way to the end at 100. So if I wanted it to kind of maybe start coming in later, remember this keyframe controls it. So this keyframe, this first keyframe is at 0, and that's where it's at 0% opacity. If I wanted it to happen, start turning it on later, I could just simply move that keyframe and say, okay, don't start turning it on till this point in time. Now let's go back, hit play, and now my text comes on. So it's really just the beginning of how you can start learning video editing in a program you're more comfortable in, Photoshop, because everything I'm telling you how to do it translates over to Adobe Premiere Pro, or maybe even Adobe Premiere Rush if you want to start with something simpler. The concepts are the same, where you're doing something along a timeline and you're just telling it at each point in time what you want to happen. Now, it could be movement, it could be scaling, it could be opacity, depending on the effect, it could be text warp, it could be a style that happens. Any of those things could be happening over time. So once you're done with your video, you would go up to your file menu, choose export, and choose render video. And that will come up with a dialog box. That is over here on the screen. That will come over a dialog box that tells it, where you're going to put the video and what quality it's going to be and so forth and so on. So you can choose all of those things here in this dialog box. All right, let's go ahead and cancel that out. And that is video editing in Adobe Photoshop. Next up, let's go ahead and switch this back to my workspace. Get rid of that timeline. And I'm going to turn off these layers for now. Okay, great. Okay, next up, HDR toning. Now, normally when we think of HDR as combining two or more images together to create an HDR, a high definition, a high dynamic range image. So that's what HDR stands for. So high dynamic range is usually the easiest example for people that haven't worked with HDR before is when you think of, you've ever taken a photo of someone standing next to a window and it's bright outside, you either got one of two things. You either got the person looks good, but the window's completely blown out, or the window looks good and the person's completely dark in a silhouette. That's because the cameras, especially for many years early on, could not distinguish that scene, so they picked one or the other to expose. High dynamic range allows you to take two shots, one of the window that looks good, one of the person that looks good, and then combine them together so you get one single image that the window looks good and the person looks good. So again, usually it takes two or more images and you have to plan it up front when you're shooting those images for that to happen. Now, we have HDR in our cameras now. We have some processing that happens even on your phone that can make all that happen up front. But what people started doing with HDR when it first came out is started making these super realistic or surrealistic images that were like over the top, Harry Potter kind of looking images. And thankfully that trend kind of went away and people kind of got tired of that. So hopefully it will stay away. But if you wanted to just add some HDR to an existing image and you didn't have multiple frames up front, there is, under your image menu, under adjustments, there is this thing, and it's not a filter, it's actually an image processor called HDR toning. And with HDR toning, yeah, that's fine. It will create an HDR look based on whatever presets or whatever settings you give it. So just right off the bat, this was before and this is after. It's just adding more dynamic range to this photo, or at least a look of more dynamic range to the photo. So if it's too much, you can pull it back. There we go. You can adjust the gamma, you can adjust exposure, pull it back a little bit. And they're presets. Now again, some of these presets are dated and they may not look great anymore, or they may not look great in the beginning, but they are here, like saturated. That one looks okay still. City Twilight, that one, again, I wouldn't use that, but flat. Not sure the point of that one unless you really needed a flat looking image. Monochromatic, black and whites. Photorealistic, high contrast. So some of these presets are really dated and show how bad things used to look when HDR. You get these halos around the subject back in the day when HDR. Now, Scott 5 is Scott Kelby's back when he made this preset for this. And again, this is what people were doing back then. And RC Concepcion also had a preset that the Photoshop team used, and that's his. And then there are just some other ones that, yeah. So I would probably say stick with the defaults and just tweak it a little bit, or maybe use some of the ones that aren't so crazy looking, like just, no, not that one. Where's the one I liked? Yeah, something like photorealistic where it's not over the top. And even this is kind of a little bit over the top because I can start to see the halos and things. So use this sparingly, and you get some nice looking images. I would say some of these ones that were just bad back in the day are still bad today. Yeah. Yeah. So use this carefully. All right, next up. That was number 8. Number 9. Number 9. Oh, we're going to use this. I was going to use the same image. Hang on. Let's go back to the fisherman. All right. This is one that is for, it's called the frame tool, but technically what it's doing is creating vector shapes and allowing you to put images in them. So the frame tool actually comes from InDesign. InDesign was the first application from Adobe to have a frame tool. And still to this day, it's one of the most useful tools. You couldn't use InDesign without it. But in Photoshop, the tool got added a couple years back. And as you can see at the very top, when I choose the frame tool, I have the option to use elliptical frames or rectangular frames. I also have, once I drop a frame in, I can then drop an image into that frame and it will take on the shape of that frame. Now it still creates a layer and basically creates a vector mask right off the bat for you. So if you're wanting to get a design or a template together and you're going to drop things in, maybe you're a wedding photographer and you want to create a background scene with different people from the wedding in the main, and on top of that, the frame tool is very useful for designing things like this in simple one clicks without you having to be a master at, oh, I got to crop it separately. I got to learn how to do that. I got to learn how to move it around. I got to learn how to position it inside the frame. I got to move the frame around, which is cool too. And I got to get it all aligned. Like, it's just easier to do with frames. So the frame tool is more of a design tool for Photoshop, but definitely useful for anyone that's using Photoshop for any kind of template driven stuff or stuff that you want to create just composites and you want to composite multiple images on top of each other to kind of create a design look or a card or a contact sheet or something that you want your customer to look at. Can you use FX with the frame tool? I don't see why not. You mean like, for example, maybe, let's see, a stroke. And let's make that stroke bigger. Oh, it's doing it on the photo, not the frame. So it depends. Let me see what this does. Hang on. I'm curious. Yeah, I think it's going to do it on the photo. So that's putting a stroke around the photo, not the actual frame. Now, if you render that, like if you convert this to a, yeah, if you duplicate this and convert this to just a rasterized image of the photo, then yeah, you could put effects on it. But then you would lose the ability to edit the frame. So depends on what you're looking for. All right. Yep, like a drop shadow. I got what you meant, but I had never tried it on the actual frame itself. So let me see something here. Just out of curiosity, what are my options here? If I convert that to a smart object, what does that do for me? Let's see. That might do it. Yeah. So convert it to a smart object first, then that gives you the best of both worlds because you can always drill back into the smart object and access the frame or use the smart object for the effects. So for example, if I also add stroke to this and interesting that. Yeah, that's it. That's the trick. So convert it to a smart object first, then you can go effect crazy. All right, next up, that was number 9. Number 10 is my favorite hidden thing that most people don't know about Photoshop because I use it literally every single week for this masterclass. Let's go into my next image here. And you might recognize this image when you see it. It's the thumbnail for the videos for this masterclass. So, you know, basically only a few things change on the thumbnail week to week. The title obviously changes. Depending on what applications I'm going to show, they change. And I usually swap out the background, this background image, for a screenshot of something else, something like Lightroom or Photoshop. So 3 things usually change with this. And then if you were doing this manually, after you change those 3 things, you would have to export out each one at the right size, so forth and so on. So under your file menu, you've always had this. You've had this for like years and years and years. You have this generate option. And it's off by default. When you open up an image in Photoshop, it's off by default. But if you go in and you check image assets, so it's just on or off, it's either got a check by it or it doesn't. From that point on, Photoshop is paying attention to what you name your layers or layer groups. So for example, each one of these three sizes are in layer groups. So you'll notice the name of the group is not just the text. Oh, hang on, let me zoom out so you can see it better. On the very end, it's also the extension, JPEG, PNG, GIF, whatever. Whatever you want this to be. And by literally just naming the layer or the layer group tells Photoshop to output that file. So for example, if we were to go look at where this image has been saved, this whole Photoshop file has been saved. Let's go out to the operating system. Yep, let's go here. And inside, so here's the, let me close this. So the actual Photoshop file is called, there it is, Terry White Masterclass new.psd. So what it puts next to that file, wherever it's saved, is a folder called Terry White Masterclass new assets. So if you turn on generate, it's automatically going to make that folder. Inside that folder will be any layers that or layer groups in this case, that you've named with a file extension. It will actually output a JPEG or a TIFF or a GIF or whatever you output. And you can even specify sizes. You could specify quality. You can specify lots of different things. So look up Photoshop generator syntax in Google and you'll get a list of all the things that you could type into your layer name. So for example, watch what happens. Now these were last updated at 10:52 a.m. So basically an hour ago here. If I now go in and make changes to these, so let's go to logos, which is a linked object, and let's go in and tell it that next week I'm going to be talking about Lightroom and Lightroom Classic, and close this and save it. It updates all 3 because this was all placed from a library item onto each one. And then I go to the title and I update the title. So the title is going to say, ask me anything. And now it's hard to see, it's white text on a transparent layer, but hang on a second, you'll see it in a second. Make it a little bigger. Great. Close it, save it, and now the text has been updated. Now, every time I make a change, Generator is automatically generating new images. So if we go back into the operating system, those new images have now just been updated at 11:54 a.m. So here's the one for Twitter. Here's the one for 720p. Here's the one for 1080p. They've all been updated and output instantly every single time. You don't even have to hit save in the file. Every time you make a change, it will do that. All right, does that lag Photoshop? Not at all. You would never even notice it. Like, I never noticed that generator is on when I'm working on this file. It's just as fast as if generator wasn't on, because it's happening so quickly in the background. Now, let's say I just go rename a specific layer that's in use. I don't even know what layer 37 is. Oh, no, let's use something more interesting. Let's go to logos. And let's say logos, we're going to make a separate file for that. We're going to make it logos PNG. So now I just renamed one file, one layer, actually, logos PNG. And now if we go out to the operating system, there's logos PNG. So it's automatically made that for me if I needed that separately. So you can literally name each layer whatever file format you want, and it will automatically make the files for you just by having generator turned on. That's why it's off by default for all your other images. You have to turn it on for a specific image. So now every time I make changes, if I leave that ping file will get updated as well. All right, that's my 10 things about Photoshop, and I just made it under the belt that you might not have known about Photoshop, or if you knew, you might have forgotten about. Cheers, everyone. Thanks. Have a great weekend and continue watching today. Up next is the Daily Creative Challenge. Bye, everybody.